So here's the philosophical case in the defense of that second premise, that abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being and is therefore wrong. The philosophy helps us understand that there are no differences between you and the unborn, you and I and the unborn, that justify killing the unborn. Stephen Schwartz notes that there are only really 4 basic differences between the embryo that you and I once were and the adult that we are today. The differences are this: size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. I'll go through these quickly, but you can remember them with the acronym SLED: size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. These are really the only relevant differences between you and I and any of the unborn. Now, each of these properties or each of these differences are degreed properties. They're held in varying degrees, meaning that both between individuals as well as over the course of your life, these things vary. At different times, you're smaller or your level of development has changed. We'll get into that. But if your human value or your human dignity is based on something that changes, something like these 4 differences between you and I and the unborn, if that's where our value is grounded, then your value changes with those properties. My argument is that none of these properties are a good basis for value, for human dignity, and therefore it's wrong to intentionally kill the innocent human being through abortion. So let's look at these quickly here. First, size. And I would simply say men are, on average, larger than women. This is across cultures, across history. Men are, on average, larger than women physically. And if size is where we get our value, then we recognize that men are, on average, more valuable than women. Of course, though, I hope many of you are laughing or incredulous that I would say that sentence, that men are more valuable than women on average, because we all know that that's ludicrous, that that's ridiculous. And indeed, that idea has actually led to incredible tragedies and oppression of women throughout most of human history. So we recognize on its face that simply being larger than someone else is not a good place to look for value. Just because the unborn are smaller than us, does that mean that we can treat them however we want, that they're less valuable than us, and we can seek to impose our will on them? I would argue no. Moving on to the second difference that we recognize, the level of development. Again, if level of development is where we're going to ground value, then we would recognize that 1-year-old girls, because they have a less developed reproductive system than a 14-year-old girl, a 1-year-old girl is less valuable. And therefore, if it came down to it, it would be morally permissible to take the life of the 1-year-old girl rather than the life of the 14-year-old girl. But again, we recognize that level of development does not confer human value. The third argument, again, real quickly here, environment. Does where you are give you more or less value? Think about inside the womb versus outside the womb. This is the argument that is often made. Just because the unborn is inside the womb, it is less valuable, and therefore, in the case of abortion, the argument is made that the person, the human being inside the womb, can be killed simply because of where they are. I live in Nebraska, where we had the partial birth abortion ban that was taken all the way to the Supreme Court. And the reality of partial birth abortion is that you would leave just a small portion of the child inside the birth canal in order to make it legal to kill the unborn. The state of Nebraska rightly recognized that that was not consistent and therefore had to be disregarded, had to be prevented from happening. The last difference, real quickly here, the degree of dependency. The example I like to use here is conjoined twins Abby and Brittany Hensel. Abby and Brittany Hensel were born in 1990. They were conjoined at the pelvis. They have 2 spines, 2 spinal cords, some separate organs, but share other organs and have 2 arms and legs. Now, when I was growing up, this was one of those stories that I was fascinated with. They're highly dependent on each other, to the point where the parents and the doctors were concerned that if there was even an attempt to separate the two when they were first born, that an attempt to separate these 2 women would result in one or both of their deaths. Highly dependent on each other. Because they are dependent on someone else significantly, especially biologically in this sense, does that then mean that they're less valuable? Again, I would argue no. So you can remember the differences between the unborn and you and I sitting here right now with the SLED acronym: size, level of environment, and degree of dependency. My argument is that none of these differences, none of these things that change, are good places to ground human value. And And because they are not good reasons to ground human value, we then recognize, or we can infer, that all humans are valuable simply by virtue of being human. And if that is the case, the unborn, that single-celled human being, is valuable just like you and I, and must not be treated any differently, especially when we're looking at its life.
We at Ratio Christi are so excited for the opportunity to provide you with our newest initiative, our monthly webinars. These one-hour sessions will help to equip you with historical, scientific, and philosophical reasons to believe Christianity is true. Now, most months you'll hear from different Ratio Christi staff from across the country, and you'll get to hear their stories of how they are changing student lives for Jesus Christ.